Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he crawled out of the ventilation shaft on level 7 of Nexus Station. His blue maintenance uniform was covered in dust and grease stains. The alien workers walking past him didn't even look in his direction. To them, he was just another human doing the dirty work that no one else wanted to do. The station was huge, bigger than most cities back on Earth. It floated in space like a metal mountain, with thousands of beings from dozens of different worlds living and working inside it. The Zalarians who ran the place liked to remind everyone that this was the most important trading post in 3 sectors. Ships came and went every hour carrying goods, people, and secrets across the galaxy. Jake picked up his toolbox and walked down the corridor. The walls were made of smooth metal that reflected the soft blue lights overhead. Everything here was designed to look impressive and expensive. The aliens who visited this place were important people. Diplomats, merchants, generals, and scientists. They wore fancy clothes and talked in loud voices about big deals and bigger wars. None of them noticed the quiet human with the toolbox. Jake had been working on Nexus Station for 8 months now. He fixed broken pipes, cleaned air filters, and made sure the lights stayed on. It was simple work, but it paid enough to keep him fed and gave him a place to sleep. More importantly, it kept him invisible. As he walked toward the central lift, Jake heard voices coming from an open doorway. He slowed down and pretended to check something on his scanner. 3 Zalarians were standing around a holographic display, their tall blue forms casting long shadows on the floor. The Hegemony Alliance is moving ships toward the border worlds, one of them said. His voice was deep and rough, like rocks grinding together. Intelligence reports say they have at least 50 battle cruisers in the Kappa sector. 50 cruisers? Another Zalarian shook his head. That's enough firepower to glass 3 planets. What are they planning? Nothing good, the first one replied. The Free Worlds Coalition is scrambling to respond, but they're outnumbered 2 to 1. If war breaks out, it's going to be bad for business. Jake kept walking, but his mind was already working on what he had heard. 50 battle cruisers in the Kappa sector meant the Hegemony was planning something big. The Kappa sector was 3 jumps from the main trade routes, perfect for staging a surprise attack. If he was planning an offensive, that's exactly where he would put his fleet. But Jake Morrison was just a maintenance worker. He wasn't supposed to think about military strategy. The lift took him down to level 12, where the water recycling systems were located. This part of the station was darker and quieter. The walls were plain metal, and the floors were rough concrete. No fancy aliens came down here. It was just humans and a few other species that the Zalarians considered lower class. Jake found the broken pump that had been reported that morning. It was a simple fix, just a clogged filter that needed cleaning. But as he worked, he noticed something interesting. The pump was working harder than it should be. The flow rate was up by 15% from normal levels. More people on the station meant more water usage. But the passenger manifests he had seen yesterday showed normal traffic levels. So why was water usage up? The answer was simple. There were people on the station who weren't on the official records. Hidden passengers, probably military personnel or intelligence agents. The kind of people who traveled in secret and paid extra to stay invisible. Jake finished fixing the pump and made a note in his work log. Just routine maintenance, nothing special. But in his head, he filed away another piece of information. Secret passengers, military buildups, and nervous traders all added up to the same thing. War was coming. After his shift ended, Jake went back to his small quarters on level 15. The room was barely bigger than a closet, with just enough space for a bed, a desk, and a storage locker. The walls were the same gray metal as everywhere else in the lower levels. It wasn't much, but it was home. He sat down at his desk and pulled out an old data pad. It looked like the kind of cheap device that maintenance workers use to read technical manuals. But this one was different. Jake had modified it himself, adding hidden circuits and encrypted memory cores. To a casual observer, it was just junk. To someone who knew what to look for, it was a sophisticated computer system. Jake entered a long string of numbers and letters. The screen flickered, and then a message appeared. Package delivered to Andromeda Station. Buyer satisfied with quality. Next shipment requested within 2 weeks. Payment transferred to usual account. Stay safe, old friend. The message was coded, but Jake understood it perfectly. His contact in the Earth Defense Coalition was telling him that the intelligence he had sent last month had been useful. They wanted more information, and they were paying him well for it. Jake deleted the message and turned off the data pad. Tomorrow he would go back to fixing pipes and cleaning air filters. He would listen to conversations and watch ship movements. He would be invisible, just another human doing work that nobody else wanted to do. But Jake Morrison had not always been a maintenance worker. 3 years ago, he had been someone very different. Someone important. Someone that generals called Sir and politicians feared to cross. 3 years ago, Jake Morrison had been a hero. Now he was nobody. And that was exactly how he wanted it. Jake lay down on his narrow bed and closed his eyes. Outside his small window, the stars wheeled slowly as Nexus Station continued its eternal orbit. Ships were arriving and departing, carrying their secrets and their cargo to distant worlds. Somewhere out there, fleets were gathering and armies were preparing to march. War was coming to the galaxy. And the only person who might be able to stop it was a janitor with a mop and a bucket, hiding in the shadows of a space station where nobody knew his real name. Jake Morrison pushed his cleaning cart down the main corridor of Level 3, moving slowly like he had all the time in the world. The upper levels of Nexus Station were always busy, but today felt different. There were more security guards than usual, and the aliens walking past him looked worried. 3 days had passed since Jake overheard the conversation about the hegemony fleet. Since then, things had gotten worse. News reports spoke of border skirmishes and failed peace talks. Trade ships were arriving with stories of military buildups and evacuated colonies. As Jake mopped the floor near the central command center, he listened to the conversations around him. A group of Zalarian officers stood near the main display, their voices low but urgent. The Drakmori have moved another 20 ships into the Theta sector, one of them said. That puts them within striking distance of New Geneva. New Geneva has good defenses, another replied. Orbital platforms, defense satellites, a full garrison. Jake kept mopping, but his mind was working. New Geneva was a key industrial world for the Free Worlds Coalition. If the Drakmori took it, they would control the production of military-grade electronics for half the sector. But attacking New Geneva directly would be stupid. The defenses were too strong. Unless the attack on New Geneva was just a distraction. Jake moved his cart closer to the display screen. On it was a tactical map, showing ship positions across 3 sectors. Red dots marked Hegemony Alliance forces. Blue dots showed coalition fleets. To most people, it would look like random military movements. But Jake saw the pattern. The Hegemony wasn't planning to attack New Geneva at all. They were setting up a trap. When the coalition sent reinforcements to defend New Geneva, the Hegemony would hit their real target, the supply depot at Kepler Station. Without that depot, coalition forces in 2 sectors would run out of food and ammunition within a month. It was a smart plan. Jake had to respect the strategy, even if he didn't like the people using it. He finished mopping and moved on to the next section. As he worked, Jake noticed a woman watching him from across the corridor. She was human, with short black hair and sharp eyes. She wore a simple gray suit that could have belonged to any office worker, but Jake spotted the small bulge under her left arm that meant she was carrying a weapon. The woman followed him for 20 minutes, staying far enough back to avoid attention. She was good at surveillance, but not good enough. Jake had been trained by the best intelligence officers in the Earth Defense Coalition. He could spot a tail from half a mile away. When Jake reached the maintenance storage room on level 4, he waited. Sure enough, the woman appeared in the doorway a few minutes later. "Mr. Morrison," she said. "My name is Lisa Chun. I work for Earth Intelligence Services. I think we need to talk." Jake continued organizing his cleaning supplies. "I think you have the wrong person, lady. I'm just a janitor." Lisa stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. 3 years ago, a Coalition transport ship was attacked near the Vega system. The ship was carrying classified military data to Earth Command. Everyone on board was killed, including a high-ranking officer who was traveling under a false identity. Jake's hands didn't shake, but he stopped. "Moving. Sounds like a tragedy. What does it have to do with me?" "The officer's body was never found," Lisa continued. "Earth Command assumed he died in the attack. But intelligence reports suggested he might have survived. That he might have gone into hiding. Lots of people go into hiding after traumatic events," Jake said. "Doesn't mean anything." Lisa pulled out a small data pad and showed him a photograph. It was a picture of Jake in a military uniform, standing next to General Marcus Kane at some official ceremony. The man in the photo looked younger and cleaner, but it was definitely him. "Colonel Jake Morrison," Lisa said. "Hero of the Titans. Gambit, the man who saved the outer colonies from the Catherian invasion. The brilliant strategist who disappeared 3 years ago after the Vega incident." Jake looked at the photograph for a long moment. Then he put down his cleaning supplies and sat on a storage crate. "What do you want, Miss Chun?" "The galaxy is about to explode into the biggest war in 100 years, Lisa said. "The Coalition needs every advantage it can get. We need the man who planned the Titan's gambit." "That man is dead," Jake replied. "He died on that transport ship 3 years ago." "Did he?" "Because someone on this station has been sending very detailed intelligence reports to Earth Command. Someone who understands military strategy better than most generals." Jake was quiet for a moment. Then he stood up and picked up his mop again. "Even if what you're suggesting was true, why would this person want to get involved? Maybe he learned that war isn't glorious. Maybe he learned that every brilliant strategy costs lives." "The Vega incident wasn't your fault," Lisa said softly. "The investigation proved that. You were betrayed by people in your own command structure, people who are dead now." "Tell that to the families of the people who died because of my orders," Jake said. Lisa was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small communication device. "If you change your mind, use this. The Coalition could use a man like you, the real you." She left the device on the storage crate and walked toward the door. "For what it's worth, Mr. Morrison, I think you're wrong. I think that man isn't dead. I think he's just scared." After she left, Jake stared at the communication device for a long time. Then he picked it up and put it in his pocket. That afternoon, Jake was working in the upper levels when alarms started blaring throughout the station. Emergency lights flashed red, and automated voices announced in 6 different languages that all personnel should report to emergency stations. Jake found the nearest information terminal and accessed the news feeds. What he saw made his blood run cold. The Drakmori Empire had launched a surprise attack on 3 Coalition colonies simultaneously. Thousands of people were dead or missing. The Free Worlds Coalition was declaring a state of emergency and mobilizing all available forces. The war had begun. As Jake watched the news reports, he noticed something that made him frown. The attacks had hit Ceres Prime, Harmony Station, and the mining world of Kepler-7. All 3 were important targets, but they weren't the most important targets in those systems. This wasn't the main attack. This was just the opening move. Jake closed his eyes and thought about fleet positions, supply lines, and strategic objectives. The real attack would come in 72 hours, when Coalition forces were scattered and confused. And Jake was the only person who could see it coming. He pulled out the communication device Lisa Chun had given him and stared at it. The galaxy was at war, and people were dying. Maybe it was time for the janitor to remember who he used to be. Jake Morrison stood in the crowded main hall of Nexus Station, watching the chaos around him. Hundreds of refugees from the attacked colonies filled every available space. Families huddled together with whatever belongings they could carry. Children cried while their parents tried to comfort them. The smell of fear and unwashed bodies filled the air. It had been 5 days since the Drakmori attacks began. 3 more colonies had fallen, and Coalition forces were retreating on all fronts. The news reports painted a picture of total disaster. Military analysts on the holographic displays talked about strategic withdrawals and regrouping. But Jake knew the truth. The Coalition was losing badly. He pushed his clinging cart through the crowd, trying to look invisible as always, but his eyes were taking in everything. The way the refugees were organized, the security measures, the flow of supplies. Old habits were hard to break. "Jake!" a voice called out behind him. He turned to see Dr. Kira Volkov pushing through the crowd toward him. She was a human scientist who worked in the research division on Level 8. They had talked a few times before, mostly about technical problems with the environmental systems. "Dr. Volkov," Jake said, "are you okay? I heard the research labs were damaged in the last evacuation rush." "I'm fine," she said, but she looked worried. "Jake, I need to ask you something. Yesterday, when we were talking about the ventilation problems, you mentioned something about electromagnetic interference patterns. How did you know about that?" Jake felt a cold sensation in his stomach. He had been careless. When Dr. Volkov had described the strange readings in her lab equipment, he had automatically started thinking about electronic warfare countermeasures. The interference patterns she described were exactly what happened when military jamming systems were operating nearby. "I read about it in a technical manual," Jake said. "Just basic maintenance stuff." Dr. Volkov stared at him for a moment. "Jake, I have 3 degrees in advanced physics. The things you described aren't in any maintenance manual. They're classified military applications." Before Jake could answer, the station's communication system crackled to life. Commander Vextar's voice echoed through the halls. "Attention all personnel. We have received word that a Drakmori strike force is approaching the Centauri Gateway. All civilian ships are ordered to evacuate immediately. Station security is now at maximum alert." Jake closed his eyes. The Centauri Gateway was exactly where he had predicted the next attack would come. It was a key jump point that controlled access to 4 different star systems. If the Drakmori took it, they could cut off Coalition supply lines to the entire sector. "How did you know?" Dr. Volkov asked quietly. "Know what?" 2 days ago, you told me that the Drakmori would hit the gateway next. You said it like you were talking about the weather. How did you know?" Jake looked around. The crowd was getting more panicked as the evacuation announcement continued. Security guards were trying to maintain order, but it was clear they were overwhelmed. "Lucky guess," Jake said. "No," Dr. Volkov said firmly. "I've been watching you, Jake. You know things. You see patterns that other people miss. When that supply convoy was attacked yesterday, you predicted the exact time and location 3 hours before it happened." Jake started to push his cart away, but Dr. Volkov grabbed his arm. "Yesterday, I saw you talking to that young Aquilon from communications. Zephyr, I think his name is. He was showing you fleet movement data. Why would a janitor need to see fleet movements?" "Dr. Volkov, I really need to get back to work. And another thing," she continued. "Last week, when those diplomats were arguing, About defense strategies, I saw you shaking your head. Like you knew they were wrong. What kind of maintenance worker knows military strategy? An explosion echoed through the station. Emergency lights began flashing, and the crowd started screaming. Through the main viewing ports, Jake could see flashes of light in the distance. The Drakmori had arrived. Everyone remain calm, Commander. Vextara's voice announced. Station defenses are holding. All non-essential personnel report to emergency shelters immediately. Jake watched the tactical display on the main screen. The Drakmori had brought 12 heavy cruisers and a battle carrier. It was a strong force, but not overwhelming. Nexus Station had good shields and weapon systems. They could hold out for several hours if they fought smart, but the station commander was making mistakes. He was spreading his defensive fire across too many targets instead of concentrating on the biggest threats. He was also keeping his fighters too close to the station instead of using them to harass the enemy flanks. They're doing it wrong, Jake said quietly. What? Dr. Volkov asked. Jake pointed at the display. The defense pattern. They're wasting firepower on the smaller ships. They should focus everything on the battle carrier. Take out the command ship, and the cruisers will fall back to regroup. It gives you time to call for reinforcements. Dr. Volkov stared at him. How do you know that? Before Jake could answer, another voice spoke up behind them. Because he's Colonel Jake Morrison, the hero of the Titan's Gambit. They turned to see Zephyr, the young Aquilon communications officer. His feathers were ruffled with excitement, and his large eyes were bright. I finally figured it out, Zephyr said. I've been running facial recognition scans on all the humans. On the station, your face kept coming up as a partial match for someone in the military databases, but the records were classified. So I did some digging in the old news archives. Zephyr pulled out a datapad and showed them a news article from 4 years ago. The headline read, Coalition Hero Saves Outer Colonies. Below it was a picture of Jake in a military uniform, looking younger and more confident. Colonel Morrison, Zephyr said with something like awe in his voice. You're the one who stopped the Catherian invasion. You saved millions of lives. Dr. Volkov's mouth fell open. Your military? Was military. Jake said quietly. That was a long time ago. Another explosion rocked the station. On the tactical display, Jake could see that the Drakmori were concentrating their fire on the station's shield generators. They had maybe 20 minutes before the shields failed completely. Sir, Zephyr said, the command center is in chaos. Commander Vextar doesn't know what to do. The Drakmori are using tactics we've never seen before. But you would know how to stop them, wouldn't you? Jake watched the battle unfolding on the screen. People were going to die. The station's weapons were powerful enough to drive off the attackers, but only if someone who knew what they were doing was giving the orders. Jake, Dr. Volkov said softly, if you really are who he says you are, then you need to help. People are depending on you. Jake closed his eyes. He had spent 3 years trying to forget who he used to be. 3 years hiding from the responsibilities and the guilt. But the war had found him anyway. Zephyr, Jake said finally, can you get me access to the command center's tactical systems? The young Aquilon's feathers practically glowed with excitement. Yes, sir. I can patch you in through the maintenance network. Good, Jake said. He looked at Dr. Volkov. And I'm going to need you to help me with something. How much do you know about directed energy weapons? Quite a bit, she said. Why? Jake pointed at the tactical display. Because I'm about to show the Drakmori why they shouldn't mess with humans. For the first time in 3 years, Colonel Jake Morrison was about to go back to war. The battle for Nexus Station lasted 3 hours. When it was over, 12 Drakmori ships were floating dead in space, and the survivors were running back to their own territory. The station's shields held, the weapon systems worked perfectly. And not a single person died in the attack. Commander Vextar stood in the command center, staring at the tactical display with confusion on his blue face. Around him, his officers were talking in excited voices about the impossible victory they had just won. "I don't understand it," Vextar said. "How did we know exactly where to hit them? How did we anticipate every move they made?" Zephyr looked across the room at Jake, who was standing quietly in the corner. The young Aquilan had kept Jake's secret during the battle, but his feathers were still ruffled with excitement. "Sir," one of the Zalarian officers said, "the tactical adjustments came through the maintenance computer network. Someone was feeding us perfect intelligence about enemy weaknesses and attack patterns." Jake had spent the entire battle hunched over a maintenance terminal, using his access codes to send suggestions to the weapons control systems. To anyone watching, it looked like he was just doing routine repairs, but every piece of advice he gave had been exactly right. "Run a trace on those communications," Vextar ordered. "I want to know who was helping us." Before anyone could respond, the main communication board lit up with an incoming message. The priority code was so high that it overrode all other station functions. "Nexus Station, this is General Marcus Kane of the Earth Defense Coalition. I am requesting immediate docking clearance for my command ship. I have urgent business on your station." Commander Vextar straightened up. Everyone in the galaxy knew General Kane's reputation. He was the man who had led the coalition to victory in the HFY War. He was also known for never leaving Earth space unless something very important was happening. "General Kane," Vextar said into the communication system. "This is Commander Vextar. You are cleared for docking at Port 7. May I ask the nature of your visit?" "I'm here to retrieve one of my officers," Kane replied. "Someone who has been hiding on your station for the past 8 months. Jake felt his stomach drop. He had been expecting this moment for 3 years, but it still hit him like a punch to the gut. He turned and walked toward the exit, but Dr. Volkov caught his arm. "Jake, wait," she said. "What's happening?" "I have to go," Jake said quietly. "My past just caught up with me." 20 minutes later, General Kane's ship docked at Nexus Station. The general himself came aboard with only a small escort of Marines. He was a tall man with gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to see everything. He wore a simple military uniform, with no fancy decorations, but everyone who saw him knew they were looking at one of the most powerful people in human space. Jake was waiting in the main docking bay, still wearing his maintenance coveralls. Dr. Volkov and Zephyr stood nearby, along with Commander Vextar and half the station's senior staff. Word had spread quickly that something important was happening. "General." Kane walked across the docking bay and stopped directly in front of Jake. For a moment, the two men just looked at each other. Then Kane snapped to attention and gave Jake a perfect military salute. "Colonel Morrison," Kane said in a loud, clear voice. "It's good to see you again, sir." The sound that went through the crowd was like a wave breaking on a beach. Gasps, whispers, and shocked exclamations echoed through the docking bay. Commander Vextar's eyes went wide and his mouth fell open. "General Kane," Jake said quietly, "you didn't have to come all this way." "Yes, I did," Kane replied. "The galaxy is at war, and I need my best strategist back where he belongs." "I'm not that person anymore," Jake said. "That person died 3 years ago." Kane stepped closer and lowered his voice so only Jake could hear. "Jake, we found them. The people who betrayed you on the Vega mission. Admiral Harrison was taking money from arms dealers. Colonel Price was feeding information to the Catherian rebels. They're both dead now, killed in the first wave of Drakmori attacks." Jake closed his eyes. "That doesn't bring back the people who died because of my orders." "No, it doesn't," Kane agreed. "But it proves what we always knew. You were set up. The mission failed because someone wanted it to fail, not because you made mistakes." Dr. Volkov stepped forward. "Excuse me, General." Kane, but what's this about? Who is Jake really? Kane turned to address the crowd that had gathered around them. This man is Colonel Jake Morrison, one of the finest military minds in human history. 4 years ago, he designed and executed the Titan's Gambit, a strategy that saved 12 colony worlds from total destruction. He's the reason the Catherian War ended in victory instead of genocide. Commander Vextar found his voice. But he's just a maintenance worker. He's been cleaning our floors and fixing our pipes for months. Has he? Kane asked. Tell me, Commander. Have you had any unusual technical problems since he arrived? Any systems that worked better than expected? Any security issues that seemed to solve themselves? Vextar thought for a moment. Well, no. Actually, the station has run more smoothly in the past 8 months than it has in years. But that's just coincidence. Is it? Kane pulled out a datapad and showed it to the crowd. 3 hours ago, someone on this station coordinated a perfect defense against a Drakmori attack force. Someone who knew exactly how to exploit their weaknesses and counter their tactics. Someone who turned what should have been a massacre into a complete victory. Jake sighed. General, I told you. I'm not that person anymore. Really? Kane asked. Then explain to me how a maintenance worker managed to predict every Drakmori attack in this sector for the past 2 weeks. Explain how he knew exactly where they would strike next. Explain how he coordinated the defense of this station without anyone even knowing he was doing it. Kane turned back to the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, meet the ghost of Titan Station, the man who saved the outer colonies. The strategist who has never lost a battle. Zephyr's feathers were practically glowing. I knew it, he whispered. I knew you were someone special. Dr. Volkov was staring at Jake with new eyes. The Titan's Gambit, she said. I read about that in school. 1 man against an entire enemy fleet. They said it was impossible. It was impossible, Jake said. I just did it anyway. Kane put his hand on Jake's shoulder. The Coalition needs you, Jake. The Drakmori are using tactics we've never seen before. They're winning battles they should be losing. Our generals are good, but they're not good enough. We need someone who thinks differently. And if I say no? Kane was quiet for a moment. Then a lot of good people are going to die. And you'll have to live with knowing you could have saved them. Jake looked around at the faces surrounding him. Dr. Volkov, who had figured out his secret through pure intelligence. Zephyr, who had looked past his species and seen his potential. Even Commander Vextar, who was beginning to understand that he had been wrong about humans. If I do this, Jake said finally, I do it my way. No politicians interfering. No second-guessing from Earth Command, and no more lies. Kane smiled for the first time since arriving. Colonel Morrison, you can have anything you want. Just help us win this war. Jake looked down at his maintenance coveralls, then back at General Kane. All right, General. Let's go save the galaxy. 2 weeks after General Kane's arrival, Nexus Station had become the most important military base in 3 sectors. Coalition ships filled the docking bays, and the corridors buzzed with the activity of soldiers, pilots, and intelligence officers. The quiet trading post had transformed into the command center for the largest military operation in galactic history. Jake Morrison stood in the main war room, wearing a clean military uniform for the first time in 3 years. Around him, holographic displays showed the positions of hundreds of ships across dozens of star systems. The red dots representing Drakmori forces still outnumbered the blue coalition markers, but the pattern was changing. Sir, Zephyr said, approaching Jake with a datapad. The young Aquilan now wore the uniform of a coalition intelligence officer, his feathers bright with pride. The latest reports from the Omega sector. The Drakmori are pulling back from 3 systems, just as you predicted. Jake nodded. The plan was working exactly as he had designed it. Instead of trying to match the Drakmori in direct combat, he had created a strategy that used their own strengths against them. "What about the supply convoys?" Jake asked. "All arrived safely," Zephyr reported. "The Drakmori attacked exactly where you said they would, but our ships were waiting for them." Dr. Volkov entered the war room, carrying a cup of coffee and wearing the badge of a coalition scientific advisor. She had proven to be invaluable in understanding the technical aspects of Drakmori weapons and shields. "Jake," she said, "I've finished the analysis of their jamming systems. You were right about the frequency patterns. If we modify our communications the way you suggested, they won't be able to intercept our messages anymore." "Good," Jake said. "Make sure all fleet commanders get the new protocols within 6 hours." Commander Vextar approached from the main display. The Zalarian officer now wore coalition colors and served as Jake's liaison with the alien member worlds. His attitude toward humans had changed completely over the past 2 weeks. "Colonel Morrison," Vextar said, "I have a message from the Aquilan High Council. They want to contribute 50 more ships to the operation. Tell them I'm grateful." Jake replied, "But remind them that this only works if everyone follows the plan exactly. No independent actions, no matter how tempting they might seem." Jake walked to the central display and studied the galactic map. The Drakmori Empire controlled nearly a third of known space, but their forces were spread thin across hundreds of worlds. They were strong, but they had one critical weakness that Jake intended to exploit. They were predictable. The Drakmori military followed ancient traditions and honor codes that made their strategies easy to anticipate. They always attacked the strongest enemy first. They never retreated from a direct challenge. They believed that superior firepower could overcome any tactical disadvantage. Jake's plan used all of these traits. Against them, General Kane, Jake, said into his communication device, "Are your forces in position?" Kane's voice crackled back from his flagship 3 systems away. "All units ready, Colonel. The Drakmori are taking the bait exactly as you said they would." "Good. Remember, timing is everything. If we move too early, they'll realize it's a trap. Too late, and they'll have time to regroup." "Understood." "Jake, are you sure this will work? We're risking everything on one operation." Jake looked at the display one more time. Red dots were converging on a single system, Kepler Prime, the most heavily defended coalition world. The Drakmori were bringing their entire fleet to what they thought would be the final battle of the war. They had no idea they were walking into the largest trap in military history. "It'll work," Jake said. "Trust me." 6 hours later, the Battle of Kepler Prime began. The Drakmori came with over 300 ships, including their massive flagship, the Destroyer of Worlds. It was the largest fleet anyone had ever seen in one place. But Jake had not put his main forces at Kepler Prime. Instead, he had positioned small groups of ships at 12 different locations throughout Drakmori space. While the enemy fleet was attacking one world, coalition forces were capturing 12 others. The real brilliance of the plan was what happened next. When the Drakmori realized they had been tricked, their honor code demanded that they split their forces to retake their lost worlds. This gave Jake exactly what he wanted: small groups of enemy ships that could be defeated one at a time. Over the next 3 days, coalition forces destroyed or captured 2/3 of the Drakmori fleet. The survivors limped back to their home systems, their military power broken. On the 4th day, Admiral Vyzes, the Drakmori fleet commander, sent a message requesting peace negotiations. The war was over. Jake stood on the observation deck of Nexus Station, watching the victory celebrations through the main viewing port. Coalition ships from dozens of worlds had gathered to mark the end of the conflict. Fireworks lit up the darkness of space, and the communication channels were filled with cheers and congratulations. Dr. Volkov joined him at the window. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now we rebuild," Jake said. The Drakmori will need help recovering from this defeat. The Coalition worlds will need to learn to work together better. There's a lot of work ahead. I meant what happens to you. Will you go back to Earth? Take command of a fleet? Jake smiled. Actually, I've been thinking about staying here. Nexus Station needs a new security chief, and I've gotten used to the place. Even after all this, you want to stay hidden? Not hidden, Jake said, but not famous either. I learned something these past 3 years. The most important work isn't always the most visible work. Zephyr appeared beside them, his feathers practically glowing with excitement. Sir, the Coalition Council wants to give you the Star of Honor. It's the highest military decoration in the galaxy. That's very kind, Jake said, but I think I'll pass. Give it to the ship crews who did the actual fighting. But sir, you're a hero. You saved the galaxy. Jake looked out at the celebrating ships. Zephyr, 3 years ago, I was a colonel who thought he knew everything. Today, I'm a maintenance worker who learned to listen. The second person is much more useful than the first. Dr. Volkov laughed. So you're going back to your coveralls and toolbox? Maybe, Jake said. But now everyone knows that the janitor fixing their systems used to be the man who saved the galaxy. That might make the work a little more interesting. A new ship appeared. In the distance, heading toward the station. Jake recognized the design. It was a Drakmori diplomatic vessel, probably carrying Admiral Vises for the peace negotiations. Come on, Jake said to his friends. We have a peace treaty to negotiate. And after that, I have some broken pipes on level 12 that need fixing. As they walked toward the docking bay, Jake felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years. He felt like he was exactly where he belonged. The nobody who saved everyone was ready to get back to work.